let's remove the provisional cast on. For this demonstration, you will need a circular needle that is the same size as the one that you used to knit the project or to crochet this provisional cast on, or a needle that is smaller. Any diameter smaller than the one that you used will work really nicely with this technique. The first thing you need to do is find your unravelable end. And so for those of you who've been following along with these tutorials, you'll know that we're going to begin with the end that has the 3 chains. And we're going to remove or pick out that end because that's the end that's going to unravel easiest. So I'm just going to undo that last little crochet chain that we pulled off the crochet hook, and I'm going to unzip this crochet chain until I get to the loop that looks like it's attached to my work. See that? See how the tail's coming through the edge of my knitting? So that's where I want to begin. I'm going to take my knitting needle and I'm going to slide it into that first loop where the tail's coming out. And then I'm going to pull on that tail to release the stitch. And then I'm going to go into the next stitch and I'm going to put my needle in again. And now this time I'm going to pay attention to which way the needle enters the stitch. So I want the stitch, I would like this stitch that's part of my knitting to be sitting on my knitting needle with the right leg facing. And you can fix this later. So it's an attention to detail, but you don't have to follow it right now when you're learning. But what I'm going to do is take my knitting needle and I'm going to put it into this next loop that is still attached to my crochet chain, and I'm putting it in from the back to the front. And that's so that on this loop the right hand leg will be sitting forward on my knitting needle. And then I'm going to remove the crochet chain. And then again I'm going to put my needle into the next loop like that. See it in there? And I'm going to remove the crochet chain. Now if you find it easier to put your needle in from the front to the back, or to alternate between back to front and front to back, that's fine. That's no problem at all, because you can move these stitches around on your knitting needle later on and rearrange them to your heart's content. And you'll notice that, or you might recall that on the first one I didn't do anything special. Okay, so I'm just going to move along here and I'll put these stitches back on my needle, and I'm just going to show you. So right here I had a stitch that was kind of split. You see how it's kind of, let me see if I can do that. You see how it's just kind of weird looking. So I'm going to take it off the knitting needle and I'm going to find that loop that should have come through. There we go. I make sure I have all parts of it, and I'm going to keep it on my needle. Now, as you're going along, so this next stitch that's coming up, it's kind of, it looks smaller than the rest. So because I've been pulling on it this way, I may have tightened up that stitch. So if you find that it's hard to get your needle tip into the stitch, you can take the little loop that is the crochet hook and the tail and just give it a nice little pull, and that will bring the head of that stitch up so it's easier to put it on your knitting needle. So sometimes when I'm doing this, I might just hang on to that loop so it doesn't undo itself, and pull up on it, put my knitting needle into the stitch, and then pull the stitch out. Now, what do you do if by accident you pulled out your crochet chain a little bit too much and those stitches are just hanging there free? Well, that's just fine. You will probably find that they're just easy enough to slip on your needle, but that going in from the front to the back will be easier than going in from the back to the front. So I've got a couple of stitches on my knitting needle that are, you can sort of see that they're facing the other direction. I've got the right leg to the front. I can just leave them like that and I'll fix them later. So if you end up with a stitch that comes off your needle and it's, well, it just got in the wrong place, the wrong time, that's okay. Now another thing that can happen while you're doing this is that instead of going into the loop that's on the needle, you go into the loop underneath it. I'm going to do that right here. And you pull it out. And so you'll see here that I've got, look at that, I've got a loop and I've got this bar that's going over my needle. And that's because this stitch has come undone. So when that happens, and it can, you just take a locking stitch marker. You could fix it right now, but it's easier to fix it later. So I'm just taking a locking stitch marker and I'm marking those two pieces together, and I'm going to leave it dangling there so that I can come back later and fix it. And I think I've got another one right beside it. So because I've marked this one, I won't worry about that one. Well, you know, to be a good citizen, I should. Let's just mark it. Okay. And I'm going to go along, and the rest of these seem to be okay. So I will continue to pull out my stitches and meet you at the end of my row. When I get to the very last stitch, I do exactly the same thing. I've put my stitch back on my knitting needle, and I'm going to pull on my yarn here, and if for any reason there's a little tangle or something there, it should just release itself. That we started with a slip knot, and so it should release itself. But if you have to pick it out, that's okay too. All right, now I'm going to turn my work around, and before I get started on my next thing, I'm just going to make sure that the orientation of my stitches is correct, and I'm going to fix those couple of stitches that fell out along the way. So as I go along here, I'm just making sure I'm transferring these stitches from one end of the knitting needle to the other. You could use 2 straight needles, that's no problem. And I'm just checking to make sure that all these stitches are facing me with their right leg in front, left leg in back, and that is a convention that works for most knitters. And if I see a stitch that is split or not on there perfectly, now is my opportunity to fix it and make sure that you can sort of see that it looks like there's a bit of a purl bump there, and that's just one strand of my yarn that's come out and is hanging down in front. So I'm just going to make sure that when I come along, I pick up all those strands and make sure everything is lined up. And if I come across a stitch that feels too thin, again, that's likely one strand of the yarn that's just slipped its way off the needle. And so you can make sure that everything is where it should be. All right. Now here's that stitch that I clipped together because it had come undone. And so I'm going to take it apart now and show you that I have one loop on my needle and I have one bar in the back here. So that's the bar that's the loop that slipped out from inside this stitch. So I'm going to grab my trusty little crochet hook, and I'm going to transfer this stitch on my needle onto my crochet hook. And then using the crochet hook, I'm going to go underneath the bar that came undone, and I'm going to pull it through the front or the knit side of that stitch. And then I will pop it back onto my knitting needle, and making sure the orientation's correct, slide it onto the other end of my knitting needle. And the same thing with this one. I'm going to let it go, so I just have the loop on my needle, and there's that one bar that escaped while I was taking my crochet chain out. So I'm just going to slide the loop onto my crochet hook. I've got the knit side facing me, so I can slide my crochet hook under the bar and pull it up and through that loop. And then I just find it easier to put it back onto my left hand knitting needle, but of course you could put it onto the right side. And then I'm going to check that the orientation's correct as I transfer it over. Okay, and now I'm looking for, remember I had those 2 stitches that the crochet chain popped out, and so I put them back on my needle, and I knew that they would come on backwards. And so when you're going along here, you can kind of feel that the orientation is not the way it should be. So this one has the left leg facing the front and the right leg is on the back. So I'm just going to stick my right hand needle into the back loop and turn it around as I go across. And then I think that very first stitch that I put on the needle, I think it's facing the wrong way as well. So I will just make sure that, yes, so again, it's got the right leg on the back. So I'm going to put the right leg to the front just by poking this right hand needle tip into the back leg of that stitch. And now my stitches are all back on my knitting needle and they're ready for whatever I would like to do next. In this case, we're going to bind off, but you could continue to work in the other direction with any kind of trim that you would like to put on. So if this was the bottom of a sweater and you wanted to add ribbing on, you now have live stitches ready to do that. If you wanted to graft it to another piece, you could. The one thing that, and you can carry on in stocking stitch, because we are picking up the loops between stitches, you may see a slight half stitch off if you continue on in the same in stocking stitch, and if your gauge has changed at all, it might be easy to see. So what I recommend is that you do something different. So if I wanted to continue on in stocking stitch, I might do a row of purl and come back again and then begin my stocking stitch, just some little border to break the eye so things aren't necessarily, you know, it's if there is a slight change, it's not visible. And that's removing your provisional cast on.